Well, so Rachel, it's delightful being here with you today. And so we're going to talk about the Sustainability Coordinator position in Fairfield. This is what you occupy, and we're darn happy about it. So tell us, what does the Sustainability Coordinator actually do?
Well, I'm going to give you some background on the position first. There was a Sustainability Coordinator here in 2010, 2009, 2009,
right?
15. Anyway, a lot of things had happened, and there was a lot of fond memories of that.
Yes.
And then it kind of ran out of funding, and then the position evaporated, and it was basically reimagined in the Fairfield Forever plan as somebody who could help coordinate. There were a lot of goals and dreams shared by the community with the city at that time, and it was recorded in that comprehensive plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that happened is that the Sierra Club decided they may want a sustainability coordinator, and they had already gone through the Forever plan and wanted to take up some of the initiatives that the city had identified and move forward with that, and one of them was the sustainability coordinator. The city was kind of interested in having one. The university had looked at having one, and so they ended up saying, well, why don't we collaborate? And long story short, of course,
Yep.
let's collaborate on this position. So they raised money from the university, Maharishi University, and the city of Fairfield, and the community. So
Right.
a lot of community members, private donors, and businesses donated to the position to fund it for 3 years.
That's great. And as I recall, we raised over $240,000
Yeah.
from, which is very impressive. So, yes, we have fond memories of the Go Green plan and all the great work that Scott Tim did. And also, I have to say, from a personal standpoint, just a big shout out to Sierra Club for putting together the Strategic Conservation and Community Resilience Plan, which then wove into the Forever Plan and created really what we have today. And so, tell us a little bit about your background, because it's quite impressive.
Well, actually, when I was interviewing for this position, I was mostly impressed by the fact that it was a collaborative position.
Mm-hmm.
And also, being a sustainability coordinator, it seemed like an ideal thing for me to do because I have a very diverse background. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer,
Mm-hmm.
and I lived in a rural small town in New Mexico for 8 years. I worked on a newspaper, as a staff writer. I got my master's in English, and then I taught English at the college level for about 10 years. And then I basically jumped into the renewable energy world when net metering became a possibility in New Mexico. And so I was in the renewable energy industry for a number of years, wearing many different hats because it was a startup, an emerging industry.
Right.
And so I worked in installation, I worked in the media side of it, I worked in project management, I went into distribution, I did a lot of business development, I worked as an engagement manager. So I found myself being very flexible and working within all these different kinds of communities, and
Right.
people would say, well, you went from teaching to
How did this
renewable
happen,
energy,
right?
like what is that?
Right.
And what it all is about empowering
Mm.
the individual to be within the community to create positive change. Educating youth and empowering people to understand how to make persuasive arguments, how to read critically, how to be a critical thinker, was always very important to me. And then also I taught creative writing as well, and so creativity is such a huge part of being human.
Right.
And I had 2 kids of my own, and they played in the woods, and they grew up in this kind of unstructured way. When the idea is that the human potential, I've always felt that in my life, is so much human potential for good and for change. And the renewable energy industry was so full of that possibility of growth and becoming and changing the world. And the idea of distribution versus centralized power is kind of like the old industrial revolution model, kind of shifting and basically going out to the people. So the people have the knowledge and the people have the power, the ability to create energy and basically distributed society,
right,
as kind of a purpose of mine, I think. And so I'm a jack of all trades, and to be honest, people look at my resume and they just think, well, what are we going to do with you? Maybe we could make you a position, let them invent it.
Which I guess is what we did, right?
So the sustainability coordinator is really great because I did a lot of food building capacity and farming in my property when I moved down to Corrales near the river in New Mexico. And I worked within the community at that point too, and also worked in the renewable energy industry as an executive director for a trade organization. So I had a lot of experience working with the government and other nonprofit organizations, and being sensitive to the small business needs and the volatile market that is renewable energy. Also is local food. So when you really look at what resilience is, it's really the ability to secure your own energy, your own food, and community is a huge part of that as well. And as we learn how to engage and solve problems together, I think that's kind of what I'm doing so far. And right now I'm in the investigative phase of my position where I'm learning all the different things that are going on in Fairfield, and I'm always, surprised and pleased.
Amazed, as former Mayor Ed Malloy said, the city of 1,000 passions. It's hard to keep track of everything. In fact, it's probably pretty much impossible. So that's really, really interesting. I think maybe sometimes people think, well, sustainability, does that have to do with a particular ideology, or what does it have to do with my life? Why would we want to become more sustainable? Why would we want to have a more regenerative community, if whatever that means to people? So how does this relate to the average person's life?
I mean, that's a really great question. Sustainability has many uses based on where you're going to be, applying it, right? So sustainable harvesting. When I was in the Peace Corps and I was going to harvest some plant, it was very important for my hosts and my friends there to tell me that you can't take them all. You have to leave enough. Leave like that big fat one there, because that one is going to make more. How much you take off of a plant, for example, how much fish you take, all that kind of stuff is sustainable because you want it to regenerate on its own. And I think a lot of people think about living subsistence living is like poverty, but it's not. It's actually, there's so much abundance in the jungle. It's just like there's plenty of other sites where you can get that same, vegetable or fruit. Just don't take them all from one place, So
it's so fascinating, isn't it? I mean, we have largely lost that sense. Now I think, 95% of the food that we eat in Iowa, with some of the best farm ground in the world, the most concentrated amount of farm ground that you don't have to irrigate, but we only grow about 5%. We only eat about 5% of the food. 100 years ago, it was flipped. We ate mainly what we had. I mean, our heritage, I don't know what your heritage is, but mine was on the farm. I'm the first generation born off the farm on both sides of my family. And it would have been completely astonishing to them to feel like they had to live only by virtue of going to the grocery store. You went to the grocery store for a few things you couldn't get, like salt and that kind of thing. But pretty much the rest of the stuff you grew, and you ate what you grew. Now people can say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not a gardener. I want to go to the grocery store and get my stuff. One of the things that I think about is when Katrina hit in New Orleans, the only hospital that had power was the one that had a array. And so I think from my side, supporting this effort, supporting you, I think about resilience as simply the capacity to survive under the varying conditions that are happening now and are going to be happening more and more as the climate changes and different patterns come up and different disruptions come up. So it really is about being able to be abundant, not impoverished, but abundant. And if you look at Aboriginal societies, they don't feel poor.
Well, they're not. They live
not.
in pure abundance, and they have a lot of luxury time to be in community as well. Yeah. I would say when I define the word resilience, I think about soil. So resilient soil is a soil that is live. It is capable of withstanding drought and flood, and also grow nutritious, beautiful food. And that's what a resilient community is too. It's strong enough. It's healthy enough. It's bonded enough that it has what it takes to blow with the wind. It's kind of like the Taoist sapling, right? The sapling bends in the wind. It doesn't break because it's brittle and it only has one way to do something. And that's why collaboration and cooperation and being open to everybody's ideas, because really when you really look at behind anything is basically wanting to live in a more ease, more well-being state of living.
Where people in general have enough so that there's not a lot of social stress.
Right.
I think that's one of the things that I really feel strongly about, that you'll always have stratification. Some people making a lot of money is their path in life. It's what they like to do. You should do it. You need to accumulate capital. But the people who serve the coffee and do the other things, they also need to live. And so if we think about localizing more of what we do, including our entrepreneurship. In Fairfield, we should take credit for what we do. I was speaking to someone who knows a fellow who works for GoDaddy, and they have an entrepreneurial score. And the average micropolitan, that's what we are, population 10 to 50,000, the average score, and I don't know the exact calibration of this, but it's a relative thing. So the average score is 2.5. Now, in this case, in this area, in Iowa City and West Des Moines, their score is like 7 or 8. You want to guess what Fairfield's is?
9?
30.
Ooh.
He said they didn't even put it above the chart because we didn't fit on the chart.
Right.
So we already have a highly regenerative culture from that standpoint. No one freaks out if a business doesn't work. They just say, okay, they learn, and that becomes part of the soil, if you will, through which other businesses grow. I've really always taken great pride and really a sense of accomplishment. It's been hard won, but we can do that. We actually have the capacity to do that. So I think for me, it's spreading that capacity to be entrepreneurial and to think creatively and to simply create what we want in a lot of different areas of life.
Well, yeah, and because we're a micropolitan, that's a very interesting word.
Yeah.
We're not going to have a big government solution anyway. We just don't have the tax base for it.
Well,
and I don't think we really want it. Most of everything we do in the community of Fairfield is done by the community. And so as a coordinator, I feel like my role is really to see who's doing what and bring people together in that. I like what you were talking about, this idea of everyone having enough, right, or abundance, living in abundance. In the Solomon Islands, where I was in the Peace Corps, they had a very organized social structure. They didn't have a lot of need for goods and hoarding, because it's a tropical region and food's going to grow tomorrow. There's no reason to save. There's no way to save it. So there's a lot of sharing. And so you basically increase your social capital by sharing. And so the people who are very motivated, who want to grow the most sweet potatoes, who want to raise the most beautiful pigs, now they would have a party and invite everybody to the party and share their bounty. And there's like a reciprocity system that happens from that. And it's basically like, you have given this to us, and now, not right this minute, but sometime I'm going to get you back on that.
Right.
And it took me a long time to understand that, because it's so foreign from our perspective. Because, you give me something, I want to pay you. And you're like, oh, no, that's okay, you can have it.
Right,
and it's always like, well, there's always, okay, what can I give you? I mean, that's a natural human tendency, and we've been trained.
Or at least a cultural tendency that we have acquired.
Right. Well, we tend to want to just give money for it. So here's a good or service, and here's money.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do it in a reciprocity way, in a system like they have there, I found myself in a situation where I saved somebody's life, because I had some above average first aid experience from being a lifeguard, and I'd had another job working with mentally disabled children. And so I was just able to deal with a crisis in a way, and stop somebody from bleeding to death, and they got to the clinic and they lived. And I was just, okay, well, that's what you do, no big deal. And about 6 months later, these two women show up with these giant sacks of purple yams. And the yams are different than our yams. We think of our yams as those are sweet potatoes. Yams are a very sacred food, grown by men. So I didn't know it at the time. I just got this two giant sacks of tubers, and I was like, what are these? I didn't connect. They just didn't say anything to me. They just gave them to me, and they left. And it took me a long time to realize that was basically the reciprocity, that they brought a giant harvest of yams to me, which of course I couldn't eat, so I shared them. And I ended up having all this social credit that I didn't. And all of a sudden, what do I get instead? I get, here's a big bunch of prawns, that just show up at my door. And, things just started to really move, and I basically became part of the economy through sharing.
Well, and it really is fascinating in a very tiny little way. I have a garden in my backyard, and it's one level of satisfaction to go pick tomatoes or some broccoli or some Swiss chard or some beans and go up and cook it. I mean, it's nice. I mean, it's like a 5-minute trip from the field to the pot. What is dramatically nicer is when my friends come and I can say, let's grab a bag and go shopping. and they go pick it up, and it's such a beautiful feeling. And my feeling is that we can do a lot more of that. We already do a lot of that. I mean, when you look at even care, as our population gets older, there are so many people who are caring for others, sometimes for compensation, sometimes maybe not for so much compensation. So one of the thoughts that I have is, how can we do more of that? The Golden Magnolia is a great example. 2 women had a vision about a church. Who does that? And now they got a soup kitchen. Now they got this, and now we got a gathering spot. So, yeah, I think Fairfield's a fertile place for this kind of experimentation in development of social capital.
I couldn't agree more.
We're in violent agreement, right?
I was just talking about. We were just talking about the community orchard, and how that is kind of a commons space. Yes. But this idea of the commons is not really an understood concept by most people.
Not recently.
And what really recently happened is they have a couple people who are managing that and caring for the fruit, and they went down to do some harvesting, and everything was gone. And I realized a lot of people have said, well, who's taking care of the community orchard? Well, we'll go do it. So sometimes it's kind of like, so there is kind of a need for coordination to say, well, here are these people who have been managing it, and thank you for going and picking all the apples, but we have to, think about what's going on and who's volunteering for what and who's actually creating stuff, so that we're not creating redundancies, and we can cooperate and we can bring everybody together.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the challenges when we're rebuilding structures that might have been common or were common. I mean, the water temples in India are a great example. A temple where the monks have been apportioning water for 800 years, 900 years. everyone goes along with it because everyone realizes that their common interest, I mean, every one of those farmers would probably want more water, but they're okay with the water they get because that's what works overall. And I think that idea has eroded because, as I think you pointed out, we've become quite centralized. Our power comes from a power plant, our groceries come from the grocery store, services, and I think without being impractical, I think we can really develop a lot of that inside an entrepreneurial structure. Doesn't mean we're going to only barter, but the idea of different elements of society cooperating with each other and building on each other. Talking to Galen at Breadtopia, okay, how can we get some farmers who are already farming to grow rye so they can, and who's going to clean it, who's going to mill it? All those kinds of things are a part of building this robust internal structure, right?
Well, we have to rebuild those relationships. And one of the things about small farms, or even what I call micro farms, because if they're not, I don't even know what the size is. I think in actually Iowa it's 10,000 acres. No, yeah, 10,000 acres is a small farm. No,
10,000 acres is a big farm.
10 acres.
10 acres. 10 acres. 10 acres would be a very, even 100 acres.
It's 300 acres. It's
Right,
300
yeah,
acres
right,
in New Mexico, but I think it's because it's ranching.
Right.
A lot of ranch lands there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think it's 10 acres or less. And so really the micro farm idea is not really as particular here. But I think one of the things that you're talking about that really resonates with me is that a lot of the services that we've been counting on from the government or to provide for us is basically could be done by an entrepreneurial group.
Right.
And what better way to bring in young people than to give them an opportunity to grow a business? They have got the energy and they've got the, maybe the vision. Especially with farming, we have to rethink the way that we think about farming. It's not just a smaller producer of commodities. It is actually a valuable service, a valuable product, and we have to rethink the way we pay for it and the way we support it. And it's in all of our interests to basically create as many local food producers in our area and build that capacity now.
Well, yeah, when there's disruptions from afar,
we can't wait for
one
Walmart.
one would have hoped that, oh gosh, we should have thought of that and maybe built more resilience. I mean, what
Right.
Jocelyn and Tim Engman are doing, or Barb Siren, starting, with growing a garden to feed her kids 20 years ago, and now 20 acres of vegetables. That's a lot of vegetables. That's
Right.
a lot of vegetables. And Tim and Jocelyn will do it for 5 years. 20 years later, they've got a lot of value added, but they don't have massive acreage, but they have very intense production. And then they do value added. And to me, I don't know whether it torques everyone up like me, but I get really excited when I think about building out the local food infrastructure so we have better food, more local food, more resilient food, and it's a lot more fun.
Right.
And we can employ more people because we have high labor, high value, as opposed to very low labor kind of commodity.
Right, it's kind of like we have to drive down the price to the lowest level in a way so that people can afford it. But it's kind of almost going backwards because we have so much food waste that goes along with that, and that only the perfect broccolis can come to the grocery store. When you have a local food, locally produced, it's 100, 300, 400 times fresher and more nutritious than if you pick it unripe and you spray it with chemicals and you put it in a truck and you truck it all over the United States.
Right.
And I used to sell local produce to the restaurants, and I would say, he would say, why would I buy your tomatoes for $4 a pound when I could buy these tomatoes for 80 cents a pound? And I said, because, well, you're just throwing your 80 cents in the garbage. That's why, because it doesn't taste like anything. It doesn't have
Now
any.
tell us what you really think.
And I'd say, I would basically go down to the local sandwich shop and I would buy a sandwich and I would take the sandwich and I put my tomato on one side and leave their tomato on it, and I would give them a taste and say, take a taste of this sandwich, take a taste of that sandwich. I said, which one you like better? Well, this one is much better.
Much better, right?
I said, all it has on it is my tomato.
It's the same sandwich
It's
for your
the same
tomato.
sandwich. And so, local food is so much better. One time I convinced him to work with me, and he put together a bisque. And people were like, what's in this bisque? Oh my gosh, it's so delicious. And he's like, oh, just tomatoes and cream and a little garlic and salt and pepper. And they're like, oh, no, what else did you put in here?
Well, yeah, it's a magic juju.
Did you put some like MSG in here? What's in here? No, that's just how tomatoes taste.
That's how a real tomato tastes, yeah.
That's how real, and we know like from our own gardens that a tomato out of the garden is not the same, even as an organic tomato from the grocery store.
Now, speaking of gardens, one of the things that I know we're working on, that we were able with the Sustainable Living Coalition to work up a grant, and hopefully as part of your activities, we're going to be expanding that. But the whole idea of using home gardens as more of a base of food production. Dr. David Fisher, as you know, has done a lot of work with that. But when you think of that, and you think of people who are of limited means, we've been able to either amplify or reestablish or establish 106 home gardens. And I've had more than one person come to me and say, I don't know what I would have done without my garden. This is what I've been eating. This is how I've been feeding my children. And so I think that has a great deal to do, or that has a role to play in resilience. Because on my heritage, I'm in the farms, if you didn't have a garden and you didn't raise a pig or whatever, you didn't eat. So that's something I think that is an underappreciated asset that I think we can develop.
Well, and it's also something we have to remember, right? My mom, I hated green beans, fresh green beans, because only the poor kids ate fresh green beans. She wanted a can of green beans. Which I always thought was really funny.
Yeah, pretty hysterical, but in a
right?
pathetic, in a kind of a sad sort of way, right?
Right, and so a lot of that was basically taught away, and then now we think, you have to have big equipment, and you have to have these rows, and you have to have tractors, and you have to do all these things to have a farm. Really, the only thing rows are for tires. They, most plants do not need that kind of
Have you
space.
take a look at my garden?
Exactly.
You couldn't get a tractor through that. Really
They're
easily.
like 5-year-olds. They want to be right next to you, and they want to be right next to each other all the time. It's like plants don't want to be like in their own little silo, and neither do people. It's kind of, and that's what.
We're getting deeply philosophical here,
but that's what we want to talk about. It's like a healthy soil, which a healthy community, a healthy society grows nutritious plants. And as we basically nurture ourselves, I mean, even spiritually, you're told, like, it's almost cliche, it's just love yourself. Well, we have to remember how to love ourselves. Right. We have to remember that we do live in abundance. Or we were just talking the other day about how we have so many apples on the trees right now.
Yep.
And I would go pick a tree, and I have so many apples, I just can't give away enough. And everything is like that in nature except for money. If I have a giant stack of $20 bills and I don't want to give you, split it up between the three of us.
Right.
But if I have apples, I do, right? I mean,
isn't it funny how it works that way?
Isn't it? It's a thing. I meditate on that sometimes, just to think about like how can we basically remember abundance, and
we're not very far away from it. It wasn't more than a couple of generations ago when, if you wanted a barn raised, you got the neighbors in and you put the barn up. My sister-in-law is from Slovakia. She has the most amazing stories of the village where her mom grew up, and even the small town where she grew up. What did you do with the pig? Particularly when you didn't have refrigeration. Well, they had all these sophisticated ways of keeping oxygen away from it. So the knowledge is there, and my sense, talking particularly younger people, is there's a hunger for that deeper, more connected quality of life that isn't abstract. That connected quality of life comes from practices, from knowledge, from the way we interact with each other. But we're so far ahead in Fairfield. We have done such a great, Werner here, you know, we've done such a great job learning how to entertain each other. I mean, it's and how to feed each other, how to produce art for each other, and then have it available for everyone to enjoy. We do have a tremendous advantage here, and as I say, when you got an advantage, press the advantage, and that's why I'm personally so thrilled that you're here. That this is a great way to organize some of these advantages that, you know, can self-organize, but there's nothing quite like a person whose proclivity is to organize assets as opposed to top-down dictate. We're very fortunate to have you, and we're gonna rock and roll with this thing, aren't we?
I love how you said that, organize assets. Yeah, and thriving organized assets.
Great.
Yeah.